She laughed at my implants like I was some plastic doll. What she didn't know. I only got them because cancer nearly stole my life, and she was about to lose her job for mocking it. If you've ever been judged for something people don't understand, or dreamed of flipping the script on someone cruel, this story is for you. Hit subscribe, tap like, and buckle up, because this isn't just revenge, it's redemption written in fire. Let's dive in. The moment the doctor said the words high risk of breast cancer, my world tilted. I was only 24. Young. Healthy. But behind my quiet confidence was a family history soaked in dread. My mother, gone. Both grandmothers, gone. I'd watched cancer drain the life from the women I loved most. So when the specialist showed me the results, those quiet, lurking cells in my breast tissue, I didn't hesitate. I chose the most drastic path, a bilateral mastectomy. Both breasts removed. Not because I didn't love myself, but because I wanted to live. They warned me about scars. Minimal, they said. They were wrong. I woke up with jagged, angry wounds that didn't just slash through my skin, they carved deep into my soul. Thick, pink, raised lines, mocking me every time I dared look in the mirror. I stopped looking. Threw out the mirrors. Hid in my apartment. I was alive, yes. But I wasn't living. That darkness swallowed me whole. Shame crept in like fog. I refused to see friends. I flinched at my own reflection. I became sick at the thought of touch. Alone in that void, I found a therapist who didn't judge, only listened. For months we talked. And one day, they said something that caught me off guard. Would you consider speaking to a plastic surgeon? I hesitated. Not because I was vain, but because I was tired of hating my own body. I tried creams. They failed. I considered lasers, but they were expensive and uncertain. Then came the suggestion of implants. Not bigger, not flashier, just enough to soften the battlefield that had become my chest. I wasn't looking for perfection. I was looking for peace. I chose DDs slightly smaller than my natural F cup. Subtle. Respectful to what was lost. But for the first time in years, I could breathe. I could stand in front of a mirror and not flinch. The confidence didn't rush in, it tiptoed. A glance here, a smile there. I reclaimed myself inch by inch. By 28, I was back on my feet, working in an office, blending in. I kept my past private. No one needed to know what I'd endured. Until one day, in the blur of planning a vacation with an old friend, my carefully guarded truth slipped. We joked about flights and airport scans, something silly about implants and metal detectors, and Jill heard us. Jill. A woman whose soul seemed soaked in vinegar and smugness. She latched onto that overheard joke like a vulture spotting roadkill. And by the end of the day, it wasn't just Jill who knew, I was the office rumor. She had a boob job. Not, she's a cancer survivor. Not, she nearly lost everything. Just, she has fake tits. I laughed it off at first. Because what else could I do? But the laughter never reached my eyes. Then came the comments. You're more plastic than Barbie. She's fake, twice. And, my personal favorite, though I only heard it secondhand, she's just a sack of silicone. Each word was like acid, corroding the peace I'd worked so hard to rebuild. I asked her to stop. Once in the elevator, once in the bathroom. Quiet places. Vulnerable places. Places with no cameras, no witnesses. She'd smile, tight, insincere, and return to her desk, only to weaponize my body again by lunchtime. The attacks weren't daily. But consistent. 3 comments a week, every week, for 3 months. Enough to rot away sanity. And the worst part? Some people laughed. Others avoided me like I was radioactive. I became that girl with the implants. Not Emma. Not the efficient analyst who hit every deadline. Not the woman who clawed her way out of depression. Just tits. Then one afternoon in the lunchroom, Jill finally crossed the invisible line. I said something offhand, calling a movie plot shallow, and Jill, smirking over her overpriced salad, quipped, "You'd know all about being shallow," and gestured straight to my chest. I froze. In that instant, everything in me screamed. I saw my mother's face in the hospice bed. I felt the itching scars that haunted my sleep. I remembered the therapist, the fear, the blade, the tears. And I snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I stood up, steady as stone. "You know why I have these?" I said, eyes locked on hers. Because I had cancerous cells in my breast tissue. Because I watched 3 women die from the same disease. Because I had surgery that left me with scars so violent I couldn't look at myself in the mirror without breaking down. And implants? They weren't about vanity. They were survival. They were so I could look at my own body and not want to disappear. The room was silent. Jill blinked. Her smile faltered. I picked up my lunch, nodded politely, and walked out. That night, I thought it was over. But the next morning, HR emailed me. A formal complaint. Hostile work environment. Meeting scheduled. My heart dropped. I called for clarification. Debbie from HR was handling it. Debbie, Jill's friend. That's when I knew I wasn't walking into a meeting. I was walking into a trap. But I wasn't 24 anymore. And I wasn't going to be their victim. The morning after that HR email, I didn't cry. I didn't panic either. I brewed my coffee in silence, staring into the rising steam like it was an oracle. My stomach churned, but I'd felt worse. I'd faced cancer in the mirror. A woman like Jill? She didn't scare me. Not anymore. Still, I wasn't stupid. I knew the power of whispers. Of proximity. Jill was plugged in, her claws embedded deep in the office ecosystem. Friendly with Debbie in HR. Always lingering near the manager's desk like a shadow with lipstick. If I walked into that meeting unarmed, I'd be their next casualty. But if Jill wanted war, I'd give her chess. I dug out my old contract. Thick and dust stiff. Buried in a drawer like an unwanted memory. I flipped past vacation clauses and sick leave until I found it, complaints protocol. A small but powerful clause buried in legalese. In matters involving interpersonal conflict, the employee reserves the right to request an impartial overseer should the appointed HR reviewer have a personal connection with the complainant. I highlighted that sentence in blazing neon yellow, made 3 copies, and slipped one into my folder. Just in case. Then I started recruiting. Facebook. Slack DMs, texts. To every coworker who had quietly offered support after my lunchroom speech, I asked the same question. Do you remember Jill making any comments about me? Are you willing to write a signed statement? Some hesitated. Jill was toxic, but she was powerful. Like a storm no one wanted to stand in the path of. But others were ready. Ready to push back. Because I wasn't the only one Jill had humiliated. I wasn't the only target. Within hours, replies trickled in. Then they poured. By the next morning, I had 16 signed statements. Some were 1 paragraph. Others were bullet-pointed chronicles of Jill's office crimes. Comments on people's weight. Ethnicity. Hair. One even described a cruel joke about another woman's miscarriage, whispered during lunch like it was gossip. Jill wasn't a mean girl. She was a virus. And her time was running out. That morning, I arrived early, an unfamiliar sensation. My heels clicked across the laminate floor like a war drum. One by one, I gathered the letters. Smiles were exchanged in passing. Quiet nods of support. Fear still lingered, but so did something else. Conviction. 9:50 a.m. I stood outside the HR office. Debbie looked up from her desk and rose with a smirk. "You're with me," she said, already turning. "No," I replied. She froze. I stepped forward, my voice calm, my hands steady. "My contract entitles me to an impartial overseer. Given your personal relationship with Jill, I'd prefer someone else." Her smile cracked. "I can be impartial. I believe the clause allows me to make this request regardless. I've highlighted the section for your convenience." I slid the copy across her desk. She didn't touch it. Just stared like I'd slapped her with it. She stomped away. 5 minutes later, she returned with the supervisor and another HR rep. "What evidence do you have that she can't be impartial?" the supervisor asked. I didn't flinch. "I've been informed Jill and Debbie are close friends. I'd prefer not to take that risk." Debbie scoffed. "This is ridiculous." The supervisor glanced between us. "Fine," he said. "Let's all sit down. Together." And so we did. All four of us. Around a sterile table with no soul, no warmth. Just paper, folders, and unspoken tension. Debbie's hands shook. Mine didn't. The interview began. "Why do you believe Jill reported you?" they asked. "Because I embarrassed her in front of others. Because she spent months making inappropriate comments about my body and assumed I wouldn't push back." They pressed on. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" "Because I believed it would stop. Because I asked her to stop. Because every time I tried, she laughed it off." What exactly happened? And that's when I laid it all out. Not just the story of the implants, but the scars, the therapy, the depression, the decision to reclaim my body, not for approval, but for survival. I gave them names, dates, a full chronology. Then, with a soft smile, I opened my folder and slid 16 signed letters across the table. Each one a nail in Jill's professional coffin. Debbie paled. Her hands hovered over the papers, trembling. One by one, they read. No one spoke. "Do you have evidence for the lunchroom incident?" they asked. "There's security footage. And here's a list of everyone who was there." One of them submitted a letter. They asked again about Jill's knowledge of my medical history. She knew about the implants, not the cancer. Because I owe her nothing, not my trauma, not my explanation. Silence followed. Then the supervisor stood. "Well," he said, "I think we're done here." He shook my hand. And just like that, I was free to return to my desk. But the war wasn't over. Back at my cubicle, I opened my CV. Just in case. I had no illusions. Jill wasn't the type to fall quietly. She'd claw, scream, spin her web like a cornered spider. But I was ready. For the first time in years, I was ready. Then it began. One by one, my coworkers were called to HR. Those who had written statements. Those who had witnessed the lunchroom confrontation. 10 minutes in, 10 minutes out. A steady parade of justice. But not Jill. Not yet. She watched the parade with narrowing eyes, chewing her lip raw. She must have known something had changed. Finally, at 3:30 p.m., Jill was summoned. She returned 30 minutes later. Seething. She didn't speak. Just glared. Her face twisted like she'd bitten glass. At 4:30 p.m., they called her again. When she came back, she wasn't just angry, she was packing. Shoving files, yanking plants from pots. Her desk exploded into a tornado of cardboard and resentment. She ranted, loud enough for half the office to hear. She got me fired. She lied. She's a psycho. But no one replied. No one comforted her. Because by then, they all knew the truth. And then she was gone. An email landed in my inbox moments later. Your case has been closed. Thank you for your cooperation. Just like that, it was over. But for the first time in years, I felt something deeper than relief. I felt whole. The office was quiet after Jill left, but it wasn't peaceful. You could feel it in the air, like a thunderstorm had rolled through and left static on everyone's skin. Eyes lingered. Conversations paused when I passed. Not in fear. Not even pity. Just awareness. I wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't want to be a hero. I wasn't trying to start a movement. But when I walked back to my desk that evening, I saw something strange, tiny signs of change. A woman from accounting gave me a thumbs up. The usually silent IT guy nodded. One of the interns, barely old enough to rent a car, whispered, "That was badass." I didn't smile. Not fully. I still didn't know if I'd have a job next week. Because Jill may have been gone, but she wasn't the root of the rot. She was a symptom. The real problem was deeper. You see, people like Jill thrive in silence. They build their power not just on cruelty, but on the cowardice of those around them. A sideways joke here. A body-shaming whisper there. A nudge, a wink, a laugh at someone else's expense. It's never just one comment. It's culture. And our office was sick with it. She had allies. She had protectors. Debbie in HR, of course. But others too, coworkers who once laughed at her jokes now stared at their keyboards. People who never defended her, but never defended me either. So no, the silence wasn't peace. It was recalibration. They were watching me. Waiting to see if I would crumble. If I would run. If I was just another broken girl who had a moment of bravery but not the stomach for the fallout. They didn't know who they were dealing with. The first sign came 2 days later. I was called to the supervisor's office, not HR. Just my manager. He sat behind his desk with a manila folder and the tight smile of someone who had been told to smile. I wanted to personally thank you for your professionalism throughout this matter, he said, tapping the folder. It wasn't professional. It was personal, I replied. He blinked. Well, regardless, your conduct has been noted. I think you'll find your annual review reflects that. Annual review. Right. It had been pushed back during the HR mess. I hadn't even thought about it. I'd assumed it'd be neutral at best. But when I opened the folder, I saw a 3% raise. Unexpected. Symbolic. Not life-changing, but confirmation I had weight now. They couldn't afford to lose me. After that, things started shifting in stranger ways. People who had once avoided me now made small talk. Harmless. Polite. But calculated. The kinds of people who always align themselves with whoever's rising. I didn't trust it. And then there were the quiet ones, the real allies. The ones who had signed letters or given statements. They checked in. Offered lunch. One even invited me to a book club. I accepted. Not because I needed new friends, but because I wanted to know who still had a spine. It was during one of those lunch breaks that another story emerged. Her name was Ava. She was a project coordinator in a different department. We'd never spoken before, but she pulled me aside in the break room one Friday and said, "Thank you." "For what?" I asked, confused. She hesitated. "For surviving." Then she told me her story. Years ago, she'd come back to work after maternity leave. Jill had made jokes about her weight, about how mommy brain must be affecting her emails. Nothing direct. Just barbs. Veiled insults. Management did nothing. HR told her to document it better next time. She didn't. She didn't want to rock the boat. But watching Jill pack her things and get escorted out, had done something to her. She wasn't afraid anymore. That night, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I realized what revenge had really given me. Power. Not control. Not dominance. But influence. I had turned pain into precedent. And it rippled. 3 weeks after Jill's termination, an anonymous survey went out. It asked about workplace behavior, about language, about inclusion. It had never been sent before. A month later, Debbie was reassigned to another department. No one said why. But I knew. I wasn't the only one watching anymore. The company sent out a new HR contact. His name was Raymond. Fresh face. Neutral eyes. He asked to meet with me briefly just to touch base. I agreed. We met in the glass-walled HR room where I had once sat, trembling, unsure if I'd leave with a job. Raymond smiled. "I've reviewed the previous case," he said. I nodded. "I want you to know, we're updating our harassment protocol because of it. Your actions, they mattered." I didn't cry in that meeting either. But I felt something warm spread through my chest. Not victory. Not pride. Just peace. That weekend, I went shopping for the first time in months. Not just groceries, but clothes. A dress. Something light. It showed just a hint of cleavage, not much. But enough that I could see the gentle slope of my implants. I turned in the mirror. And smiled. Not because I was beautiful, though I was. Not because I looked normal, though I did. But because I saw me. Unapologetic. Alive. Whole. Jill thought she could humiliate me into silence. But what she really did was ignite a reckoning. And I wasn't done yet. The next time I stepped into a staff meeting, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the girl with the implants. I wasn't the charity case. I wasn't the whisper in the break room. I was the woman who got Jill fired. And that title came with weight. For better and for worse. The managers now called me sharp. Coworkers who never noticed me before now asked for my opinions. Even those who once stayed silent in Jill's shadow acted like we'd always been on good terms. They smiled wider, laughed louder, asked to collaborate on projects. But I didn't forget. I remembered who looked away when Jill made those jokes. Who chuckled. Who avoided eye contact when I walked by holding back tears. I knew who they were. But I didn't need revenge on them. I already had something better, choice. Choice of where I invested my energy. Who I trusted. Who I partnered with. And who I left behind in the old order that had crumbled the day Jill packed her desk into a cardboard box. But not everyone adjusted so easily. Power resists change. 3 weeks after Jill's firing, I received an email. No subject line. No name. Just one sentence. "Enjoy your fake sympathy, bitch." I stared at the screen. It came from a throwaway company address. No trace. No name. No guts. For 10 minutes, I sat frozen. Then I screenshot it. And I sent it to Raymond in HR. His reply came within the hour, "Thank you for forwarding. We're investigating immediately." That was the difference now. I was listened to. Raymond called me in the next day. Calm. Respectful. "We're cross-checking the login logs. We're taking it seriously." I believed him. But I wasn't afraid. Because this wasn't weakness anymore. This was proof that what I did mattered. That the culture was still trying to purge itself. And every cowardly little email only proved that light was finally shining into places that had been dark for too long. The HR follow-up came 3 days later. They'd traced the login. It was from Ava's supervisor. The same Ava who had thanked me in the break room. I felt my stomach twist. Apparently, he had resented Ava ever since she became more confident, since she joined a support Slack channel, started reporting inappropriate jokes, and no longer laughed at his backhanded compliments. Raymond assured me he was being disciplined. I asked if Ava knew. "She will by the end of the day," Raymond said, his face unreadable. I left the office that afternoon feeling like I was carrying someone else's trauma in my chest. But I knew what I had to do. I texted Ava. "I heard," she replied. "Thank you for speaking up again. I'm okay. Honestly, I think I needed to know." That night, I couldn't sleep. Because it hit me, this wasn't about Jill anymore. It wasn't even about me. It was about all of us. All the women who had ever laughed off an insult because they didn't want to be seen as dramatic. All the survivors who shrank to make others more comfortable. All the people told to be grateful, to be quiet, to take the hit and move on. We weren't just surviving now. We were building something. The Slack group Ava mentioned? It was growing. Someone added me to it. Safe space. Just coworkers, all genders, all roles, sharing stories. Someone posted, "I saw how Emma handled Jill." It gave me courage to report my own situation. I didn't reply. I just read. Each line was a war cry whispered in digital ink. Then someone asked me to speak. Not publicly. Just a closed forum, 20 or so employees. To talk about what happened. Not as an accusation. But as a case study. I said yes. The following week, I sat in a circle of chairs in a borrowed conference room. No mics. No cameras. Just coffee, silence, and breath. And I told them the truth. About my mother. My scars. The therapist. The fear. The guilt. The implants. And Jill. I ended with the line that had been ringing in my head for months, "What they mock you for, is often what they fear you'll use to rise." No one spoke for a moment. Then one by one, they nodded. Clapped. A few cried. I thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. A week later, the internal newsletter had a new section, Voices That Matter. A quote. No name. Just mine. What they mock you for, is often what they fear you'll use to rise. The next quarter, the company hosted its first internal equity summit. They invited me to speak again. This time, I said no. Not because I was afraid, but because I was tired. I had done my part. I had cracked the glass. Others could take it further. Let them. I had healing to do. But just before the summit, I received a message from Raymond. Just wanted you to know, HR policies were rewritten. Jill's case was cited. He attached a document. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Instead, I shut my laptop, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the sunlight. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying shame. I was carrying change. And it looked beautiful on me. They say revenge is sweet. But mine was quiet. It didn't come with fireworks or applause. It didn't come with a dramatic confrontation in the office hallway. No one stood up and clapped. There was no camera zooming in on Jill's face as she realized her empire of whispers had fallen. It came in soft ripples. In changed behavior. In rewritten policies. In the silence that followed cruelty, because now people knew someone was watching. Someone who wouldn't stay quiet. But here's what I learned: this was never really about implants. Not even about Jill. It was about power. Who's allowed to speak? Who's expected to swallow pain with a smile? Who gets to define professional, and who is told they're too emotional, too dramatic, too much? Jill wasn't just one mean woman. She was the voice of every toxic workplace that hides behind jokes and informal hierarchy. She was the consequence of a culture that says, it's just a comment, while carving wounds into people who carry them home. And I was done carrying it. That day I stood up in the lunchroom. I didn't plan a speech. I wasn't trying to start a revolution. I just wanted her to stop. But revolutions rarely start with grand designs. They start when someone, somewhere, refuses to shrink again. And that's what I did. I stopped shrinking. My body, with all its scars and choices and stories, was mine again. My voice, long silenced by fear and what-ifs, was now a hammer cracking glass ceilings open. And with every word I said, someone else found theirs too. Ava filed a formal report against her supervisor, and HR acted swiftly. An intern who had been bullied for months finally requested a department transfer. A junior staffer wrote an internal blog post about surviving harassment in a past job, and got dozens of thank you emails in return. The Slack channel safe space grew from 20 members to 100. Then 200. It eventually became company policy to assign trained peer advocates in every department. And my quote? It lived on. They printed it on a banner during the next company-wide wellness event. What they mock you for is often what they fear you'll use to rise. They never used my name. I was fine with that. Because this wasn't about recognition. It was about reclamation. Every time I thought of Jill now, I didn't feel rage. I felt nothing. Because when you're finally free from the gaze of those who tried to break you, their opinion becomes irrelevant. She called me fake. But I was the most real I had ever been. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw not shame, but story. A story etched into my skin, rebuilt by my own hands, and told on my own terms. I still wore those implants. Not because I needed to. But because they were a reminder, not of vanity, but of survival. Not of shame, but of strength. They covered scars, yes. But more than that, they carried the weight of every woman who ever had to prove she deserved to take up space. They were mine. So was the power that came after. In the end, I didn't just survive Jill. I outgrew her. I didn't just win a battle. I changed the battlefield. And the next time someone tries to laugh at a woman's pain, reduce her to what they think they see on the surface, I hope they remember my story. Because now, the silence is broken. And we are never going back.